Well, first, I just want to give my condolences to you and say I'm sorry for your losses and thank you for your work. And I want to know how are you right now?
Thank you. That's very kind. I think I'm okay. No, actually, that's not true. I think because one of the things I'm learning from grief is to be how important I think it is to be honest about grief. I am not okay, but I also don't think I should be okay because something, just two catastrophic things happen in my life too soon, one after the other. But I'm also I have good days, and I have days that are not good at all. And I'm just learning that grief is such a complicated, multifaceted, difficult thing. I was very close to my parents, and when my father died last June, it's interesting because I would never have imagined that my mother would die a few months later on his birthday. It just, so I think it's sort of that idea of having two types of grief to deal with, making peace with one to an extent and not with the other.
Right, you wrote that, how does your heart break twice? Mm-hmm. Yeah. How are you, through the grief, how are you keeping their memories alive for not just you, but for your daughter?
Yeah. So I feel so grateful that she knew them and that they knew her. And so she's almost 6, and so she has very clear memories. And I talk about them with her all the time. And I just often will say to her, what does grandma call you? What does grandpa call you? And they had names for her. My mother called her Asanwa, which means beautiful child. And my father called her Isbonwa, which is good child. And so we do that a lot. And so what I want to do is to just try and make it sort of organic and ordinary, that they're always there as part of her, as part of the story of her life, And she still has clothes that she says, oh, grandma got me this. And she said the other day, oh, mama, my underwear is too small now. That's the one that grandma got me. And so even that, I really just treasure, and I keep wanting these conversations to continue to happen.
I want to talk about the title of your book. Why did you name it Notes on Grief? Is there what did you mean by notes?
I think I kind of wanted to have a sense of, well, first of all, something incomplete, and something, I guess, maybe kind of ongoing. Right? Because when I started writing it, it's not as though I had a particular structure or that I knew what the hell I was doing, really. I was just trying to find language, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. And I think calling it Notes on Grief was sort of, I think it was my way of trying to just, I guess, capture the feeling of something unfinished, in some ways even unformed. So in the way that I have a habit of taking notes about everything about the world. So I used to do that in a little notebook, but since the advent of the iPhone, I now do it on my notes app. And it's quite random. I mean, just whatever, observations, thoughts, ideas. And I think maybe that's kind of the sense I wanted to get with this book as well, that it's not at all a finished thing. As in fact, I don't think grief is ever finished.
Do you think that you will write more about your mother?
That's an interesting question. I've wanted to, and I haven't been able to. Yeah. But I think because writing is what I used to try and make sense of my life. So I'm sure that I will at some point.
One of the things about the book is you just really did not care what people thought of how you were grieving. You were angry. Sometimes you were biting when people, and understandably so, that's not a judgy statement, but, oh, he's in a better place. Oh, you have these, and all the platitudes that people say or think that you want to hear. And you weren't always polite in those situations. And I wonder how friends and family have received the book, that now maybe they have a better window into how you grieve.
You know, it's interesting about, you know, just thinking of politeness in the face of grief. I don't think that I think, and I say this, of course, only just learning it now because I'm in it, because the thing is that I'm as guilty as really everyone else in kind of resorting to platitude in the face of somebody's pain. And so I kind of understand how people then say things like, oh, he's in a better place, or he's an angel watching over you. But in the midst of my pain, I found it just unbearable. And I also in some ways found it too simple, too easy, too glib. And so I'll just get so angry because I think, you know, in a better place, and how would you know that? You know, now I'm kind of learning that. I mean, and even at the time, even in the middle of my anger, I knew that people meant well. You know, people. I think death is such a, you know, it's such an unknowable, such an unknown thing, and it's so final that I think we don't know how to deal with it in general. I think it's just really difficult because in some ways to be alive is to be in denial of death in some ways. And so I think there's something about us human beings that it's difficult to deal with. And I think that's why we resort to platitudes and we resort to euphemisms and talking about death, which increasingly I also don't like at all. So I find myself feeling better when I just say died. You know, they didn't pass on to a different existence. They died, you know. And I think it's also my way of trying to force myself to acknowledge this thing that has happened that's still difficult for me to acknowledge. The people close to me, I think understand. I think, you know, you also learn while grieving. You learn about love. You learn about the people who love you. And sometimes you're surprised that the people who you think love you, maybe not, and the people who you don't know care about you actually really do. It's also been a very clarifying period for me. And so the people close to me kind of, you know, get it. And I think reading the book, I had a few friends who sent me messages to say, oh, I'm so sorry. I know I'm guilty of saying this thing that you called out. And that made me feel bad because it wasn't about calling out. Because I just wanted to be true about what I was feeling. And so I would then write back and say, no, I know you meant well. It annoyed me, it upset me, but it's not, you know, it's not really a personal, it's not like an indictment of the person. If anything, it's an indictment of this larger way that we deal with grief and death and mourning in our culture.
It didn't feel like a call out. It felt like you were being honest and maybe articulating what other people feel. I had found on my own that it's just good to say, I'm sorry for your loss. And also give room for silence and not telling people it's going to be okay. And I think that it is uncomfortable for the other person to watch someone grieve because the instinct is to fix instead of letting the person cry, vent, you know, sitting there in silence.
I really love that about the silence, giving room for silence. I think it's so true. But it's also, in some ways, like you said, I think silence can be very uncomfortable. So I get that people want to fill up that silence, but sometimes, you know, I just want to hear I'm sorry, and that's fine, you know, that's because nothing can fix this, you know? Did
you find that you started writing so you wouldn't forget memories of your father? And I'm curious about the timing of the book because it was published pretty quickly.
I started writing it really, I think maybe days, and I'm not even sure how accurate I am because that whole period is just a blur now. I mean, I kind of remember very clearly hearing that my father had died, my brother saying, "That is gone." And but I really don't remember much else. I think maybe days after, I really just, it's all a blur. But I think I started in maybe like, I don't know, a week, maybe 2 weeks after my father died. And it was really, I started writing because that's what I do. Because I always turn to writing to make sense of things. And so I think it just seemed really natural that I would start writing. But I think sort of the decision to publish was something I made a bit later in the process, because I think when I started writing it, I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll send it to my brothers and my sisters, because obviously it's something that's shared. But at some point I thought, I actually want this to be published. And I think that's where this idea of wanting to, it's like memorializing my father, just refusing to let go, and also just wanting to tell the world. I wanted to tell the world that I had been so blessed to have been raised by this just lovely, decent man.
How is death treated in Nigeria? And I also wonder if people have that same uncomfortability that we're talking about. Are there any cultural differences between the US and Nigeria?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think in the US, I think there's more discomfort about death, right? I think, and in some ways, it's that interesting thing about American culture that I sometimes wonder if it's also linked to that kind of youth worship. The American culture is so geared towards youthfulness and youth and the young. And I'm sure you can tell from my tone, it's not something I necessarily admire. And in Nigeria, well, I should talk about Igbo culture, because obviously Nigeria. So in Igbo culture, which is mine, age is revered. Age is still, even though obviously everyone's become westernized and everyone, but I think age is still revered. And so because of that, I don't think there is as much of a discomfort with just acknowledging death as there is in the US. And I think both can be, I mean, I had trouble with both, especially in the early months after my father died, because I sometimes feel that Nigerian friends or relatives or even acquaintances could be a bit too, maybe a bit too matter of fact, I had a huge fight with a friend of my family's who, actually, no, it wasn't my dad, it was my mom, who a few days after my mother died, and I was just completely broken. I just would not see anyone, and he sent me a message to say, important people are coming to your house. You must come out and see them. And I remember thinking, my mother just died. I do not have to do anything. But that to me is a very Nigerian, and this guy meant well. So his point was, you have the important, government dignitaries coming, you must come out because that's the proper thing to do. And it's that kind of Nigerian, well, your mother is gone, it's happened, so you might as well come out and play host. Which I just did not get from American friends who were sending good wishes. I think, but also I felt that American friends were often more tentative. And so even that sometimes made me think, just say my mother died. Don't say, I mean, it's this kind of resorting to euphemism and not saying it directly. Yeah.
What's the response you've gotten from other readers, people who aren't in your family or acquaintance circle?
I've actually been very moved, because honestly, one of the things I hope that this book would do would be to help other people grieving. Because I found it very comforting to read other people's honest accounts of grief. I took a lot of, strength from them. I went through a period of just wanting to read everything about grief, and then went through a period of not wanting to read one word about death or grief. And when I was reading about grief, I found that the more just really honest, stark accounts just really comforted me. I felt I'm not alone. And I think, that's the most comfort one can get. So I've actually been really happy to hear from people who've said, that it helped them. And actually, a friend of a friend, so someone I don't know, sent a message through my friend to say that she lost her parents years ago. But reading this book suddenly gave her language to articulate how she had felt, and she hadn't been able to do that. And I was very moved by that.
It probably gave a lot of people permission that maybe they didn't think that they had. I have a 5-year-old daughter also. And do you feel like the industry or other outsiders have changed their view of you now that you're a mother, changed their view of you as a writer in terms of expectations, or I'm almost reluctant to ask this question because it gets so gendered with mothers talking about motherhood and their careers and writing. But if there's been any shift in how you have been perceived or treated?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I feel like these are things we should talk about more. Because motherhood does affect women's lives, and I don't see why we should pretend, that. And obviously, I also understand what the potential drawbacks are, because this is the thing that often is used to hold women back when they want to walk outside the home, and then so sometimes one wants to just ignore it so that it doesn't become, it doesn't become a bigger problem than it is. But my view is that motherhood just profoundly changes you forever, and how can you not change everything else? I think I remember when I got pregnant, and actually before I got pregnant, I wasn't sure that I've always loved children. I've always loved other people's children. So I'm very much I'm such an auntie. Like I'm completely in the business of all my nephews and nieces. But I remember thinking that my writing was so important to me that I wasn't sure that I could be the kind of mother that I wanted to be. And so that maybe I really had no business having children. That's what I used to think. Obviously now with my daughter, I cannot imagine life without her. But I also realized that things have changed. It's not just about the expectations on me, it's also about my own, things have changed for me internally. I feel as though I lost 2 years of brain ability from pregnancy, and I was just woozy the whole time I was pregnant. I felt like I couldn't think straight. I have the baby, I'm breastfeeding, everything was just very woozy, and I just couldn't create, right? And it was such a hard time for me, because I think I'd convinced myself that, of course, yes, you can do it all. You have the baby, in the next minute, you're finishing the next novel. And it just wasn't happening. And I realized as well that the physicality of pregnancy had affected my creative output. It really had. So it's the pregnancy, it's the early months when everything is new and strange. Like, my gosh, it's not latching on. And then I'm reading all of these books about motherhood, and they're like, if you don't breastfeed, you're a terrible mother. And so it was such a difficult time for me. And it's also one of the reasons that I want to talk more about the ways in which women's bodies and what women's bodies do affect women's lives, And I also remember a man who's a writer saying to me, don't you feel bad that, and it was sort of like, oh, how terrible, your pregnancy is sort of stolen writing time and creative time away from you. And it's not as if what he said was false, but somehow I just did not take it well. And I said, maybe it has, because one has to be honest, but at the same time, pregnancy and childbirth has opened me up to so many emotions, so many, there's a new ability to understand human beings that actually I feel really lucky and blessed to have. And that, in fact, in the end, I think will aid my creativity. So, it was sort of my way of saying, well, yes, so I lost 2 years, so you can't get pregnant. But guess what? My pregnancy gave me material. Thank you very much, But I also think, I don't know about, I think my publishers are still sort of, I don't know that much change with that. I think, I think I've become a very slow writer. I find it frustrating. I'm not sure how much of that I can still attribute to my child. I think I'm just slow now, I just am. But I can say for sure that the physicality of having a child, it's not even about other people's expectations, it's about what it did for me internally in my creative space, and that was significant.
During the pandemic, my husband would create these little TED Talk sessions with our teenage daughters, and one of them was on you.
Really?
Yes. I'm not a part of it. That's their thing, which I think is great, and talking about feminism. And where do you there's a certain commodification that I think is happening with feminism right now, although it's also being more widely embraced. What do you make of where feminism as an ideology and its popularity stands right now?
I think it's, and I hear you about both. I think it's not quite, there is, of course, a kind of, I guess, a cool element to an extent, so that if you're a famous celebrity, it's kind of cool, I think, to maybe wear a t-shirt that says feminist. But I sometimes do think that we may be, that we over emphasize, I think we give it more power than it deserves. I guess my point is that there is still in the real world an incredible amount of resistance and backlash to the idea of feminism, just fundamentally the idea that women are equal human beings. There's still a lot. I know, for example, how when I quote unquote came out as feminist, my perception, particularly in Nigeria, changed. So I had been this writer who, we love her books, and then the minute I start talking about feminism, I become what they call controversial. And really, when you sit back and think about it, I'm thinking, the only thing that changed is that I gave a TED Talk saying that we should all be feminists. And suddenly everything, in some ways, I'm now covered as this controversial figure. And so I like to joke and say that if I take a sip of water, somebody in the Nigerian press will say, she sipped the water like a feminist. And then lots of people will be like, feminists are terrible, they want to kill men, and I've been accused of things like destroying marriages because they say young girls listen to her and then they don't want to get married. And I've been at the airport where parents come to me and say, my daughter loves you, and I'm very worried about that because I'm worried that she'll never get married. I mean, it's...
What do you say when someone comes up to you and says something like that?
Oh, usually if I'm in a good mood, I'm quite happy to engage, because there's a part of me that just, I want to convince people. So I'll say, no, I think you've misunderstood. And I'll say, well, why do you think she won't get married? And then I'll say things like, let me tell you what feminism is. Do you want your daughter to have access to education? Do you want your daughter's clitoris to be cut off forcefully and disgustingly in the name of FGM? Do you want her to have a choice to leave a marriage that's bad? Do you want her to have access to a job that she deserves and she's qualified for? Do you want her boss to grab her breast when she walks into his office? I mean, I sort of list things. Do you want her to be greeted when she walks into a restaurant with a man? Do you want her to be allowed to walk into a restaurant alone? Because actually in this country, in Lagos, which is so cosmopolitan, there are parts of Lagos where you still cannot walk into a bar if you don't have a man with you. And so I say things like that, and suddenly they're like, well, yes, but it's just that. And then often they create a bogeyman. They say, but there are all these other feminists that say that men should be killed. And I'm thinking, no, nobody actually says that. And even if somebody did, feminism seems to be the only sort of justice movement, which is what I like to call it, where we pick out the few extremes and we then try to pretend that they represent the whole. So that happens actually quite a bit. And then, I meet young women who say things to me like, oh, I went out on a date, and then I have an opinion that's strong, and then the guy says to me, you must be a follower of Chimamanda. And then that was the end of the date. This thing. So Oh, it's actually, and then I meet people and people are like, oh, I'm surprised. I'm so surprised that you're nice. I'm like, but why would, and they're like, because you're a feminist. So there's just so much. And I find that, and sometimes it's exhausting, you know? But then on the other hand, I keep thinking to myself, if it's making a difference for one young woman in this country, I'm going to keep talking about it. And I feel as though there are young women now in this country who have language and who have more confidence and who most of all know that they're not alone. I was actually talking to a woman in Germany, she's Nigerian, and she said to me, you know, she grew up in a very traditional household. She said her father at dinner, they would have conversations. Her father would ask her first brother, do you have anything to say? Second brother, do you have anything to say? Conversation is over. And there were 3 sisters. They just did not matter. And she says that at the time, she knew something was wrong, but she did not know the name for it. And she says, so I listened to your TED Talk and I was like, oh, so that's what it is. That's the name for all of the issues I have with my dad. And just hearing that, which she just told me about a week ago, I felt so, I don't know, it's that thing where you think, you know, my life's work, right? I'm like, this young woman suddenly doesn't feel as alone, because suddenly she's like, oh, this thing actually has validity, these feelings that I have, these objections that I have to my being reduced because I'm a girl. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I've rambled for a bit.
No, so it's another example of giving permission.
Yes, and that makes me so happy. She really, I mean, just hearing her say that just made me so happy. You know?
This year, you also published a lengthy essay on your website about the rift between you and 2 other Nigerian writers and accusations that you're anti-trans, oppressing queer people. What has been the fallout since that essay was published, and where do things stand? Oh,
the fallout, I guess the fallout, I mean, I should say that one of the things that's good, I think, for me at least, is that I don't participate, I'm not on social media, I'm not on Twitter. And it's a decision I made years ago because I just don't think it would work for me. Because I'm not a person who, because yeah, I mean, it just wouldn't work for me. So I think because of that, I know obviously that it was widely read, widely discussed, there were people for, there were people against. And you know, honestly, I have absolutely no regrets. I would completely write that again today. And it's because, and I should also say that I think it's a consequence of grieving, that I suddenly just thought, I do not have time for rubbish anymore. Just my patience for nonsense is gone. And I just feel like that there are things that are wrong that one should be able to call out as wrong. And there's a larger problem, I think, that I feel very strongly about, which is, I think that there's a thing that's happening on the left in the US. And I think it's being kind of in the way that America, you know, sort of exports everything and the rest of the world just greedily imports everything, that even this discourse is now being exported to Europe, to Africa, where this is orthodoxy of language. You have to say something in particular way you cannot question, and particularly if you're a woman. And so I'm a person who I've always asked questions. That's the person that I am. And if I don't get answers that make sense to me, I will not accept it. And so the problem really is, you know, and in some ways it was hurtful because in Nigeria, I'm actually often accused of, as the parent, another parent of a young person said, you're responsible for encouraging gay people. That is why so many young people are coming out as gay in this country, because you're encouraging them. To which I said, that's something I will wear with pride. The point being, I'm known, and it's something that I'm very proud of, to speak out for gay Nigerian citizens. This is a country where it's actually illegal to be gay. And so somehow, because I have rejected a certain language about transgender ideology, and I continue to reject that language, I just feel like one cannot then say to me that I am anti-LGBTQIA people, because I'm not. But I'm just not going to use language that doesn't make sense to me.
And I feel what language are you rejecting?
I'm rejecting language. So if I say that I think that there's a difference between trans women and women that are born female, and I'm told that you cannot say that, I just find it absurd. Why do we have to deny difference in the name of inclusiveness? Actually, the whole point of inclusiveness is difference. And part of the reason that I reject that is that it just makes me think it's like saying I'm colorblind. I just feel like it makes no sense. And it makes it difficult to talk about the particular needs of each group. The health needs of trans women are very different from the health needs of women who are born female. So if we're going to pretend that there's no difference, how do we talk about that? I mean, okay. Anyway, so I need to. So anyway, the question was, what's the fallout? I mean, the fallout is that there are people there's a woman who was supposed to interview me, and then she says, oh no, the magazine canceled because they say you're anti-trans. And I was just like, that's fine. The fallout is that I'm giving a talk in South Africa, and then I hear that people are being very insulting online and saying they'll boycott it, and that's also fine. I mean, I really think that I don't need to be listened to by everyone, right? And we don't have to agree. And I just feel like there's something lacking. It's not even compassion. There's a kind of good faith lacking. I just find it so, I mean, to be told that I am killing trans women, I mean, I just find it's just ridiculous. And I kind of think that, I sometimes think that there are a lot of people who could speak out who are not speaking out. And so there's a culture of fear. And I think it's so unhealthy for everything. And it's often people who are on the same side. So this is actually my tribe. But then it's the people who are supposed to be with you, who are your tribe, that turn around and just make very easy targets of you. And in the end, actually leave the people who are, in fact, the actual transphobic people. Nobody talks about that. But instead, it's women who are feminists, who actually are all for inclusivity and difference, and who then turn out to be the monsters. And I think there's a lot of misogyny there as well.
You're pretty critical of celebrity culture. And no, okay.
I don't think, I mean, I guess it depends on what that means though.
Well, maybe the way social media plays with it.
Tell me.
I could be wrong, so I can take.
I don't actually think a lot about celeb. I mean, it's really not a thing that I spend. I mean, I think celebrity culture is part of. It's not something I really pay a lot of attention to be honest.
You said you made a decision not to be on Twitter because it's not for you.
Yeah.
What's your relationship with do you have a relationship with other social media platforms?
I have Instagram, which I like because I think it appeals to vanity, and I have a very healthy vain side. No, actually, the reason I started doing Instagram, and also Facebook, but I don't really do it myself most of the time. But it's also because I realize that if you do not tell, to a certain extent, social media is here to stay. This is it, right? This is our reality. And there's a sense in which if you completely remove yourself from it, what you're doing is you're opening the door for other people to tell your story. So kind of participating in Facebook, Instagram, putting up things that I'm doing, I just kind of, I think it's a way of, telling my own story. So yes, that I do, but I think Twitter is a different platform.
So do you feel like you have more control over messaging and Instagram? Or maybe it's just not the same kind of feedback that you might get if you were on Twitter?
Yeah, I think Twitter there's a lot more performativity. There's a lot more, you're supposed to be having conversations in these very short snippets of words, and it's invariably going to be about people kind of trying to one up one another, and it just, I don't see how necessarily one can tell one story through that medium in a way that, so really, it's not about, so Facebook and Instagram, I'm putting up things that I'm doing, right? So you kind of see what I'm doing from my own point of view. So in a way, it's just really the ability to tell one's own story. I don't want to be on Twitter because I don't want to tweet.
What are you doing for joy these days?
Family and friends, and also really learning to let myself feel what I'm feeling. And in a strange way, it often actually results in tears, but I think ultimately it's a joyful thing. And it's still hard for me because, yeah. So family, friends, learning to just let myself feel what I'm feeling, you know.
What stories or writers are you reading right now, or who's exciting you?
What am I reading now? I'm reading a lot of things. I'm rereading a lot of Wole Soyinka because I'm writing a piece about him, his recent book. Trying to see, every time I'm asked what I'm reading, I forget. Well, here we have Collected Poems of
Audre Lorde.
Yes, and this I just started reading. This is a history book about Nigeria. Then I'm reading Soyinka's latest book again. But really, what think about? I'm reading because I'm trying to write fiction. I'm reading a lot of poetry. I read a lot of poetry when I'm writing fiction, because I don't like to read fiction when I'm writing fiction because I'm terrified that I will start to sound like whoever I'm reading, especially if I like who I'm reading. So I'm just reading a lot of poetry. I just actually started reading this book by Mina Alexander called Birthplace with Buried Stones. Also reading this essay collection that's edited by Tracy K. Smith and John Freeman that's called There's a Revolution Outside My Love. It's just a bunch of essays that are actually quite good. So I think in general, I read too many things at the same time. And this period that's been just emotionally difficult for me, there are times when it's hard for me to escape in a book because, so then I just find myself reading. I read a bit of this, I read a bit of that. I'm just switching things on my Kindle. That's actually been happening much more since last June. And it's not necessarily a good thing.
Can you tell us anything about the novel you're working on?
No.
Okay. When will it possibly be out? I know you said you're a slow writer, so you may not have a date.
No, I cannot. I mean, I'm so superstitious, and I was talking about being a slow writer. I really am. It frustrates me to no end. And so even talking about process can sometimes make me very panicky because I'm thinking, all right, you're talking about the process. Are you okay? That means you're not going to be able to write for the next week. Nothing will work. So then I get very superstitious, and then I miss when I was younger, when I was just I just couldn't wait to have free time so that I could write. And now I have all of this free time. I'm sitting here in my bloody study and just nothing is happening. It's just the most.
What is your writing process? Is it silence, solitude, music?
No, it's certainly silence, not music. Music, when I'm writing, music is noise to me. I need silence, I need solitude, also space. So it's being alone in the house just feeds something in me. And even if everyone is quiet, I still know I'm not alone, and that gets in the way. So not only do I need solitude, I also just need I just need to know that the empty rooms around me and that nobody is in them. But I don't really have I don't have a sort of, I wake up at 8 and I'm at my desk. And I wish I did, but I don't. So I'm just kind of walking when I can, when it happens. And then when it's not happening, I'm reading, hoping that words will come to me.
I teach creative nonfiction to MFA students at Northwestern, and class starts next week. And like I did last year, the first day of class, I also share a TED Talk from you about the singular story. Do you think there have been improvements since you released that TED Talk?
I think so, a little bit. Yeah, I think so. I'm also generally, I guess I like to be, I think there's a greater awareness that, this idea of that you cannot judge a person by one story, that we're multiple people, and a place as well. And also, I think there's a bit more of an awareness in media about power and how power really affects storytelling, especially of places, that if you're a journalist from New York and you swoop into Lagos and write a piece about Nigeria, a Nigerian cannot swoop into New York, and it's just that there's a power difference. I think there's a bit more of an awareness of that, but obviously there's so much more that can be done. I think, and I think even in television, which can be very guilty of a single story of coverage, I feel as though there's just a bit more, a bit more of an awareness. I think so. I feel like I've certain. Sorry?
No, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to be kind of silly and say that I think maybe there's also a bit of an improvement with me and my single stories of people and places.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your stories and your journey with us.
Thank you. It was really lovely.